It is the final Wednesday of 2017. Does this mean it's your last chance to turn this past year into a winner? Or is it just completely all around? Or maybe it was a great year in the first place and there's nothing to worry about. I can't tell you because I don't know. The only thing I can tell you for certain is the Daily Dope is in the air. Howdy, 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 gang. It is Wednesday, December 27th, and I am Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Daily Dope, as well as the Grand Poobah of the GamingGang.com. And thank you for joining me. Today is Wargame Wednesday. I tend to try to feature war games on Wednesday, or at least do reviews or unboxings, things like that. Of course, the various news that I covers everything, but I do have a little bit of wargaming news for you too. Anyway, it is another really frigid day here in the Chicago area, and I'm telling you, I think last night, early morning, with the wind, we were hitting about 20 below, so that is pretty chilly. Now, I know there's plenty of people further north that are probably thinking, wow, that's kind of like Miami weather compared to what they're experiencing, but it is pretty darn cold here. And of course, that means it's fairly chilly in the duct tape studios. Anyway, so thanks for joining me once again. Got a pretty big show ahead of us. News is a little light, but as I keep saying, it's that time of year. We're usually going to see maybe 3 to 5 news stories, somewhere around that, each day, as opposed to once, of course, convention season. I can only imagine what this is going to be like. Show's going to go on forever because there's going to be so much news out there. But I do have an unboxing today, which I will get to a bit later on, and it is Here I Stand, which is the 500th anniversary edition from my good friends over at GMT Games. So I would take a guess that those of you watching live, or those of you who catch this later on after the stream, are tuning in to see this. And this is a big game, big hefty game. We're not going to see much empty air in this box. I can tell you that right now. But before I get into that, I do have some news. I've got an item, wargaming related, from the mailbox, or mailbag, I should say. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, by all means, send me an email at mailbag@thegaminggang.com. So, with that out of the way, how about we talk about our first news story? And this is an interesting one because it's from a company that I'm personally not familiar with. I think I'm actually going to reach out to them to maybe try to get a little bit more information about their titles. Anyway, Plan B Games has revealed the release is coming for the second title in their Century game line. That's right, it is Century Eastern Wonders, and it's set to make its initial bow at the Origins Game Fair in 2018. And I have the dope. Centuries ago, the lucrative spice trade compelled the prosperous nations of the world to explore alternate routes to the sources of these precious goods. The spice must flow! Okay, that might be a reference to science fiction that some of you may not get. Anyway, these nations took to the seas to seek out exotic lands. This led to the discovery of the famed Spice Islands, where the most valuable spices of the world were found. This discovery also led to further exploration, competition, and later, war. During this time of prosperity and opportunity, you find yourself traveling on the high seas in search of these exotic wonders. As a merchant and privateer representing your nation, you seek to control this region for glory and profit. Your journey continues in the Far East. Plan B Games is proud to announce Century Eastern Wonders, the second title in the Century Trilogy. Designed by Emerson Matsuuchi? That's just a guess, folks. Century Eastern Wonders invites fans to return to the exciting world of spice trading as players take to the high seas, taking the roles of merchants seeking to prosper in the exotic Indonesian islands. Century Eastern Wonders offers new, satisfying game mechanisms that will provide infinite replayability and countless strategies to explore. Well, aren't they getting a little high and mighty there? Although I do really enjoy games that allow you various strategies to win. Fans that already own Century Spice Road will be able to combine both titles to experience the mixable game from sand to sea, an exciting rule set that provides a new, unique Century experience. Century Eastern Wonders will release on June 13th, 2018 at Origins 2018, and will be available at retailers shortly thereafter. Century Eastern Wonders is suited for 2 to 4 merchants, players, ages 8 and up. Establishing a spice trading network in the Indonesian islands could take years, but we expect a game of Century Eastern Wonders to take about 30 to 45 minutes. Pre-orders will open in the near future at planbgames.com with an exclusive pre-order promotion. I will keep my eyes peeled for any info about that pre-order, and once I find out, I'll get you in the loop too. The MSRP for Century Eastern Wonders is $39.99. Interesting. I had heard good things about Century Spice Road, so this seems pretty interesting as well. And I like the fact that they're saying that you can combine both the games together and they'll have a special rule set that you'll be able to utilize. So that's pretty cool. There is a Kickstarter that just launched yesterday, and it's probably going to be popular with those who enjoy kind of family games with a bit of strategy and a little bit of action. And it is Dwarfs Winter, and it's got a really oddball spelling. I don't know why they went with the spelling with the 7 in the title, but it is Dwarfs Winter, and it is the latest game from Vesuvius Media, another company I am not familiar with. But I have to point out, it did fund in its first 10 hours on Kickstarter. Here is the dope on Dwarfs Winter. You built and defended your kingdom, and now that winter is here, winter is coming, no, winter is here, you need to battle the harsh elements and chillingly scary monsters. Dwarfs Winter is a hand-building worker placement resource management game with tower defense elements in gameplay. Each player wants to achieve the most victory points, don't we all? But the only way to survive the winter is to work together. While Dwarfs Winter is the sequel to Dwarfs Fall, it is an independent, standalone game that includes 36 highly detailed miniatures. The game's cards and components have no text at all, which is good for me because I treat English as if it's a second language. As such, with just the rulebook, you'll be able to play the game in all supported languages. This next bit is pretty cool, because inside the core box, the rulebook will be in English. But through our website, not my website, but Vesuvius Media's website, or the Hive portal, you'll be able to download the rulebook in all the following languages: English, Portuguese, French, German, Greek, Spanish, Italian, traditional Chinese, Dutch, and Japanese. Pretty cool. Dwarfs Winter, as mentioned before, is a hand-building, worker placement, resource management game with tower defense elements. And it is for 1 to 4 players. It can be played in 30 to 45 minutes and is recommended for ages 13 and up. You can score the game and all unlocked stretch goals because, as I mentioned previously, it has funded, and you can score that at the $50 pledge level. Not too shabby. I like the artwork. I'll let some of the slides kind of pop by again. The artwork looks kind of neat, kind of cool. And as far as I understand, the game is simply, well, I guess you'll have monsters attack. I don't want to say it reminds me of like Castle Panic, because it sort of doesn't. But you'll have monsters that attack. You got to team up to attack the monsters, but you get a hand of 7 cards, and as you're going along, there's kind of a deck building element to it because you can hire mercenaries to be able to boost your deck, to improve your deck, and then you'll have action points that you can spend. And I believe the game plays out over approximately maybe 7 rounds, 8 rounds, turns, rounds, whatever you want to consider them. And if you're able to survive that, then you have survived the winter, and everybody is a winner. So once again, if you'd like to check that out, be sure to go to Vesuvius Media's website. They do app games as well. So like I said, it's another company I'm not aware of. So they contacted me, so I'll have to touch base with them. Speaking of touching base with people, after the news, I have something to mention. For those of you who are watching who are kind of pals of mine in the industry, in the gaming industry. Anyhow, I am always on the lookout for great deals for the gang out there or freebies for the gang out there. And the next one I thought was especially noteworthy because you can score yourself a free core book for an interesting looking RPG. Yes, that's because Brutal Games is offering up their corporation. Oh, you know what? Wait one sec. Sorry, gang. I completely forgot. I have a Kickstarter video for Dwarfs Winter. Duh. I just added it in last minute. Sorry about that. And then I will move on to the Brutal Games news piece. But this video, it's really short. It's about maybe a minute and a half. So let's take a peek at the Kickstarter video for Dwarfs Winter.
These last few months we prepared, we gathered, built. Winter is upon us, and we must work together to survive. Our walls are ready, but a storm is brewing. We need heroes to lead us through the deep freeze, in battles against the frost giants, and the magical beasts that roam through these lands. Dwarfs Winter is a new game set in the same universe as Dwarfs Fall, with beautifully crafted dwarf miniatures and fearsome monsters. Gather your allies and follow the music into battle. The bard's song will prevail.
I was laughing because it's like, I'm like, okay, everything's zipping along okay today. So far, no issues, nothing's popping up, and well, okay, all right. And then I'm thinking, okay, get through the news, man, because I know a lot of people are out there. They want to see Here I Stand. And I totally zoned out that I had that Kickstarter video for Dwarfs Winter. So my apologies to the fine folks over at Vesuvius Media. Anyway, there is another video I've got to share with you guys too, but this one I already remember is coming up. I can't believe I zoned out on that. Anyhow, as I started to say, Brutal Games is offering their corporation role-playing game absolutely free through Drive-Thru RPG. Yes, you heard me right. Free. Here's the dope. Hello, hope you all had a good Christmas. We've decided to make the corporation core rules free, big exclamation point. Now nobody has an excuse not to immerse themselves in brutal, cinematic, cyberpunky goodness. There will come a time when the nations of the world will cease to exist, when the anarchists of state and country are finally crushed by the juggernaut of total corporate domination. When 5 monolithic corporations are the new world powers, when the lives of billions are the sole property of the companies that employ them. There will come a time when the tools of war and politics alike are not armies or diplomats, but agents, the eyes, the hands, and sometimes the knives of the corporations. Individuals elevated to new peaks of physical and mental potential by unthinkable training and unimaginable technologies. There will come a time when you will be recruited as an agent, ordered to operate outside any resembling semblance of law, and augmented beyond what you once considered human. When you will negotiate, bargain, spy, sabotage, kill, and perhaps die in the service of your corporation. Geez, it's starting to sound just like life in Japan. I'm teasing. I'm just kidding. I'm teasing. But you will be well rewarded as long as you survive. The time is 2500 AD, and it is now. I do want to point out, normally this 256-page core book carries a $26.27 price tag. No idea where they came up with that price. But you can score the PDF on drive-thru. And I gotta be honest, this is really a steal. Well, without actually having to steal anything. Excuse me. So I will actually have I'll have a news piece up a little bit later after the show, so you can go directly to it. Obviously, you can go to corpgame.com, and I believe there's a link there too. And as always, anytime I talk about drive-thru RPG or anything like that, any of the drive-thru sites, if you visit thegaminggang.com and you follow any of our banners to one of the drive-thru sites, if you make a purchase, now once again, this is free, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you make a purchase, we get a really small, well, I shouldn't say really small, we get a small portion of that purchase, and it really does go a long way to helping keep the gaming gang around. So pretty cool. Next up, as I mentioned, I did have a Wargaming news piece. That's right, because my friends over at Victory Point Games has just launched a brand new Kickstarter, and it is for Frank Chadwick's Thunder in the East. And I have the dope straight from Victory Point Games. So let's get right into that. Thunder in the East, as mentioned, is a 2-player, although it is easily played solitaire as most war games are, and it's great for small teams, strategic level World War II East Front war game from legendary game designer Frank Chadwick. It has grown from its humble origins in the classic introductory wargame Battle for Moscow to become a big game where the focus is on the gameplay and not rulebook exceptions and minutiae. With Frank's firm design philosophy of clean, concise systems emphasizing playability girded by deep historical research, TITE is the first volume in the new ETO, European Theater of Operations, series created especially for players who still remember discovering the joy of their new wargaming hobby and who yearn for the days when playing wargames was pure engrossing fun. Okay. Thunder in the East puts you in command of the great battles raging across the entire front line in 6 meaty scenarios of 8 to 13 turns each, and a full campaign game that can be commenced or ended at each scenario date. The game scale features Axis corps and Soviet army units, with each turn representing 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the season, and each hex on the map is 30 miles across. The sweeping maneuvers, The desperate defenses, the frontline parry and thrust, and the real history of the war on the Russian front plays deftly across the map in a war game designed and tested for the perfect player comfort level. Years of development have shown us that Thunder in the East is a truly fun, classic-style war game that you will love to play, study, share, and enjoy. One you will keep reaching for on your shelf and will enjoy for decades. Frank Chadwick's Thunder in the East will run on Kickstarter through January 26th, and you can reserve a copy with all unlocked stretch goals for a $99 pledge. So I had mentioned before that I had another video that I knew I had included, and it is for Thunder in the East. I will point out, this is a longer Kickstarter video, so this is about 6.5 minutes long. So if it just happens to be a title you may not be super interested in or anything like that, now would be the time you'd go to the bathroom or go make a sandwich, or I'm going to drive off to the 7-Eleven down the road, and no, I'm not really doing that. But by all means, if you are interested, kick back, enjoy, because you'll get to hear from, the legendary designer himself, Frank Chadwick. So let's take a look at what Victory Point Games has cooking with Thunder in the East.
I'm Frank Chadwick. I'm a game designer. I've been designing games professionally since 1973, 72 or 73, so it's been a few years. And I've done some pretty big ones, a number of games about the Eastern Front, and the game I'm doing now covers the entire European theater of operations. The first installment of it, which we're talking about, is called Thunder in the East. So what the game concentrates on is not a lot of complicated mechanics and a million counters. It really does focus on the strategic and operational decisions both sides have to make to survive this campaign. And it really is a campaign that one or the other side is not going to survive.
The core mechanics of the game, boy, there's several ways to look at that. Probably the thing that most gamers are going to be interested in learning about is that this is a grown-up version of Battle for Moscow. It is Battle for Moscow on steroids. The Battle for Moscow architecture is a move, fight, move architecture. There's a special movement, and units have to qualify for that. They will then attack, and then there's a regular movement phase. And this repeats over and over for both sides. Fans of that mechanic observed, wouldn't it be cool if you could stitch together all of the great battles of the Eastern Front into one consolidated game, and then play it from start to finish if you so wanted, or play scenarios. So that's a key part of the architecture. It built off of move, fight, move, and graduated to this very easy to play full campaign mechanic.
This game, Battle for Moscow, I originally designed it as a giveaway game to promote board wargaming. It's a simple system, but it incorporates almost all the kind of nice wrinkles in ground combat and hex-based wargaming. It's a nice panzer pusher game, a lot of action. So what we decided to do was take this system and do all of World War II in the European theater on it, and that's what this first installment is this system, Battle for Moscow, but writ large, covering the entire Eastern Front. It's the whole war, starting with the Barbarossa offensive, going all the way through late 44, early 45.
You don't feel like there's a dull part of the game. The vast expanses of Russia, these are long games, long turns. You might, in some other games that I've played in the past, you feel like you're just not participating, right? That you're coasting for a while. That isn't it in Thunder in the East. You've got to be relentless every turn.
It's a nice game. I really enjoyed working on it. Learned a lot of things over the years as to how to go about doing a game, And you've certainly used a lot of those tricks in this one.
These are not trivial decisions. The game's mechanics emphasize a number of interrelated first-order effects, and you've got a tension of trade-off of more than one of them at the same time. So it's exciting to have to make, what you think of as gutsy decisions in the game. Sometimes it's the dice that's going to determine it. Other times it's other correlations of effects. They might be through the cards or other attributes of the game. Be that as it may, you control your fate, but it's not a linear fate. There's many paths to victory, many paths to defeat as well.
Hi everyone, this is Alan Emmerich from Victory Point Games, and I wanted to take a minute to thank you for checking out this Kickstarter and taking a look at Thunder in the East. Thunder in the East is important because most wargamers, I guess the number one topic is the East Front World War II. Well, here we are, the East Front World War II. It's just like old times. And even better, it is like old times because now you're looking at a game that will bring back all the fun you had in high school and college when you were just discovering the wargame hobby. Back when the rules, you read them and then they sat in the box and your mind and your eyes and your hands were over the map, having a good time playing a great wargame. That is what we're going back to with Thunder in the East. Please, supply this depot so that we can go on the offensive and print Thunder in the East and get you a copy ready to play. Thanks, everybody. This is Alan Emmerich from Victory Point Games. I'm saying goodbye.
Around. Anyway, I wanted to say that I had to chuckle when I first saw this video because I can obviously tell that it was shot at this year's ConSim World Expo, because I would recognize the Tempe Mission Palms ballroom anywhere in the little breakout rooms, kind of little conference rooms that they've got. So this does look like a pretty interesting war game. If you're not familiar with Frank Chadwick, and a lot of people just automatically associate Frank Chadwick with war games, and that's not really always the case, because Frank Chadwick was the guy who created Space 1889, which was a phenomenal RPG back from the old GDW games, and now it's published by a different publisher. Tweaked some of the mechanics in that, but I have had the opportunity to meet Frank a couple of times, and very, very nice guy. Really, really nice guy, and it's pretty amazing. He's started designing games in, 1974, 73, he said. So pretty cool. So once again, Thunder in the East is running on Kickstarter through December 26th. Just kicked off today. And you can score the game as well as unlocked stretch goals for the $99 pledge level. Speaking of designers who've been in the game, designing games for quite some time, my last news piece I found to be a bit interesting, probably more because of my longtime association with the hobby than anything else. But Steve Jackson himself announced yesterday, and of course Steve Jackson is obviously from Steve Jackson Games, he announced his first foray into role-playing design is returning home. That's right, it's returning home to roost, as the Fantasy Trip copyright has reverted back to his company. And here's the dope straight from Mr. Jackson. At the beginning of my career, long before GURPS, I created a role-playing game called The Fantasy Trip. For decades, the rights have been held by Metagaming, a publisher which is no longer in operation. I'm very pleased to announce that I have regained the 8 TFT releases that I wrote myself: Melee, Wizard, Death Test 2, Advanced Melee, Advanced Wizard, in the Labyrinth and Tolankar's lair. This is just an initial announcement to invite you to celebrate with me a day that has been a long time coming. I have no idea yet about release schedules. I will probably have to answer most questions with, I don't know yet. And then Steve Jackson goes on to mention that there's a link, you can click on it, there's a forum discussion going on, and says, hey, you know, any questions you may have, feel free to submit them, or just simply share memories of the fantasy trip. And it's kind of interesting, and kind of going back a long time. I had the original, it was Metagaming Concepts, if I remember correctly, was the full name of the company. And I had Melee and Wizard and Death Test 2. Then there were a couple of, and the interesting thing too, I never had the Lair, didn't have that one, but I did have, gosh, now I can't remember, because the adventures they would have that would come out, and they were also in these, you know, little boxes, were kind of create your own adventure type, where you would do one thing, okay, well, and if you beat this encounter, then you would go to a different page and or find a different encounter kind of thing. And I found it pretty interesting. And then I found this news item to be interesting. And once again, it sort of just goes to my love-hate relationship that I seem to have with Steve Jackson Games. And I have never met Steve Jackson. I hear he's a cool guy. And I'm not trying to beat up on his company or anything like that. Because as I've mentioned, if you watch this show quite often, I owned tons of Steve Jackson games. In fact, it popped into my head today at how cold it was today. It brought back memories when I saw this news piece about, I still remember the first day I bought Car Wars. And here I was, I have a freshman in high school, so I probably was 13. And it was a Sunday. It was like, with the wind, it was like 80 below. And on the news, they were saying, oh, hey, if you don't need to go out, don't go out, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, back in the day, you're a 13-year-old kid. It's not like these days where the parents are like, oh my goodness, I would never let you go take a bus 3 blocks or anything. I was the kind of kid that I was all over the city, right? And of course, I'm off to this hobby shop, which was, I don't know, hour and a half away on the bus, a couple of buses and stuff like that. And I had picked up Car Wars, and then it was getting super, super, super cold. And I ended up, my parents were divorced. So I ended up, my dad lived much, much closer to this hobby shop than I lived with my mom. And I ended up going to my dad's, and my dad's like, are you out of your mind? What are you doing here? So I thought it was kind of funny because it popped into my head when I saw this story and being so cold out today. Anyway, so it's very cool that Steve Jackson, the copyright has reverted back to him, because Metagaming Concepts has been gone forever. I mean, they've been gone forever. Now, the thing that kind of throws me a bit is that I did read that there's mention that there really isn't going to be any sort of changes to the game. They're not going to, like, I don't know if they're just going to like change the fonts and publish it or what. And there's discussion on this forum that they're going to look at kickstarting, I should say, Melee. I'm not sure why they wouldn't just kickstart the fantasy trip all in one, although I have an idea why, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But to me, it's really weird, because they said, well, they're not going to do any kind of revamp or anything like that. So it comes across as almost like, well, then it's just a money grab. Because I gotta be honest, folks, Melee, Wizard, Advanced Melee, Advanced Wizard, gosh, there was like a Dungeon Master's kind of guide. Can't remember. Maybe that's in the Labyrinth. It's in the Labyrinth. That's kind of the Dungeon Master's guide. have all been available pretty much in the public domain for quite some time. And I'm not talking about pirated games or anything like that, because I know of websites that are out there that have various games that have been around, that have been out of print forever, and you can legally acquire them. So I think it's really odd that they would look to kickstart that. And the thing is, Steve Jackson Games just released that big box set that looks really cool for GURPS. And what is it? I believe it's called Dungeon Fantasy. And that looks super, super cool. So I don't know why you would go and kickstart Melee. Just that, because Melee, it was sort of the hand-to-hand combat sort of thing. And it is really, really old school. So I don't know how much appeal that it's going to have for modern gamers. So once again, like I said, that's the love-hate. I love all the old stuff, and it brings back such nostalgia for Steve Jackson Games. But then every once in a while, the company does something odd that just seems like a bizarre cash grab, and I don't get it. Plus, I don't get the Kickstarter thing for Steve Jackson Games. Couldn't they do kind of like a P500-ish thing? Like, say, GMT Games does? Because really, all Steve Jackson Games is doing is, kind of determining an interest level and how many copies they need to print. They can do that on a pre-order system as opposed to Kickstarter. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on this. I just thought it was a little strange. Anyway, so that is the news for today. As I mentioned, a pretty quiet news day. So I wanted to reach in the mailbag. And Darren in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which longtime gamers, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin is like, original Gen Con up there. I have not been in the hobby long enough to have been at Gen Con back then. But seeing I live in Chicago and, well, grew up in Chicago and everything else, we used to go up to Lake Geneva all the time. So anyway, Darren had a question, and Darren wanted to know, how do you go about introducing war games to people who are not war gamers? Very interesting question. And I have mentioned before, I believe it was last Wednesday, I was talking about kind of the graying of the hobby. And just for an example, watching that video for Thunder in the East, I kind of thought to myself, I was like, geez, the Victory Point Games gang couldn't have just grabbed a couple of like 20, 30-year-olds and thrown them into the video, even if they really weren't playing the game, just be standing there, I mean, everybody in the video is over the age of 60. So, I mean, it is that graying of the hobby. And I will mention, a game like Thunder in the East is not going to be the sort of game that you're going to reel in new gamers into wargaming or conflict simulation. I guess we'll say conflict simulation. So a few real quick thoughts that I would have as far as bringing somebody into the fold, because I really, really dig war games. I like conflict simulation. I like even just not even, like war games or anything like that. I like there to be some sort of competitiveness going on in a game. That's why Euro game, not all Euro games, some Euro games or a good number of Euro games just kind of leave me cold because you play in a vacuum. You're doing your thing and it really doesn't affect the other players. I don't dig games like that. I like my decisions to affect the other players in the game and their decisions to affect my strategies in a game. So what I recommend, and GMT is a great example of a company you can look at. There are titles from Victory Point Games that you can take a look at. I'm not overly familiar with Compass Games. Most of their games do strike me more as kind of more geared toward grognards, traditional hex and counter gamers. But you've also got Flying Pig Games, which Mark H. Walker, that's his company, as well as Tiny Battle Publishing for smaller footprint kind of Ziploc bags, where Flying Pig are big box games. there are conflict simulations that these companies have that don't smack of just the old Avalon Hill hex and counter kind of stuff. And in fact, Here I Stand, which I'm going to look at in just a moment or two, is a great example of what someone would consider as a conflict simulation, but it doesn't necessarily play like a typical war game would. In fact, Thunder in the East doesn't strike me as a typical old school war game either, because there's cards involved with it. But like a company like, let's say, Flying Pig, 65, the Vietnam game, there's Night of Man, there's quite a lot of different titles that are out there, and they just, yes, they're big counters, there's hexes, but they don't have that same military iconography on it, which turns a lot of people off. Some folks don't realize that. Some game companies out there don't realize that. They may have come up with a really cool game design, but as soon as they throw that military iconography on there, you know, like the NATO symbols and stuff like that, it turns off some people who right away associate, oh man, this is going to just be one of those push and counters kind of games, rolling my dice, looking at a combat result table. I don't dig that. And I have to point out as well that I have friends, game designer friends, who have designed war games over the years, who are kind of moving out of wargaming as well, because the games that they get just sit on the shelf because they can't get people to play, because they may not play like it, but they look like that traditional old school Avalon Hill SPI sort of experience. So I would say take a look at GMT Games, take a look at Flying Pig Games, take a look at Victory Point Games, and I'm sure there's a couple of companies that just aren't jumping in my brain right now that I could share. And take a look at stuff. Card-driven games are great. Twilight Struggle is one of my all-time favorite games. I don't consider that really a war game. I would consider it kind of a conflict simulation, but it's more ideologies, you know, the US versus the Soviets. Who is going to pretty much control the ideology of the world? Their competing ideologies. Great game, but it's really not a war game. So first of all, I would take a look at some of the various companies and look for something that's a little bit different and something that just doesn't look like the same old, same old. The other item that I would point out that will probably be very helpful is stay away from, as much as you want to game it to start, stay away from like World War II. That's a great example. World War I to a lesser extent. The American Civil War to some extent, depending maybe on what side of the Mason-Dixon line you live if you're in the US. But the reason why I mentioned kind of try to stay away from World War II is because people don't want to play the obvious, I don't want to say bad guy, because that's too, I'm simplifying things way, way too much. But they don't want to play the obvious villain normally. People who are really into history and things like that, and once you're into wargaming, sure. I mean, I used to always, not always, but almost always have to play the Axis in a World War II game. It wasn't necessarily because I shouldn't say necessarily, it wasn't because I was like, yeah, hoo-hoo, yes, fascism. Absolutely not. It was because no one else would play the Germans or the other Axis forces. So it was kind of like, yeah, okay, fine. So it just became kind of a given that Jeff's going to play the Germans. He's playing the Japanese. And it wasn't because I was like rooting for them to win the war. So try to stay away from the obvious villains in history. There are a lot of games out there where, yeah, kind of ambiguous, you know, who was in the right, who was in the wrong. And once again, I'm going to kind of return back to Here I Stand, and that's sort of the same kind of thing. So hopefully I've kind of given you an idea how you might be able to bring somebody into the fold. I'll give you a great example. Just taking a peek behind me. Let's see. The American Revolution isn't so bad because the British aren't necessarily just like villains. So I would say looking at Night of Man is really good from Flying Pig Games, and it's science fiction. But once again, you're kind of introducing people to war game concepts that they might say, hey man, I really enjoyed playing that. Let's what else you got? Or what else can we start looking into? So just kind of throwing that out. I may have babbled on a little bit too long about that. Gave you a little bit more detail than you may have wanted, but still. Anyway, I know people are waiting to see the brand new edition of Here I Stand from my good pals over at GMT, and let's move on over here and get a look. I will be very, very honest and say that this is not a period of history that I am vastly knowledgeable about. I would say that I'm not completely ignorant about the 16th century, but I tend to know more along the lines of, say, English history, a little bit of the French, but it's not that I'm not interested, because I always listen to audiobooks constantly. Not constantly, I'm not listening to one now, but I listen to audiobooks quite a lot, and they're almost always history related. And I do listen to a lot of the Learning Company kind of lecture series and stuff like that. And I dig learning about stuff that even like ancient history that, you know, years ago I knew nothing about. So anyway, Here I Stand, Wars of the Reformation from GMT Games. It covers from 1517 to 1555. And as mentioned, you can see there's a seal right down here. It is the 500th anniversary edition, which came out a little late because I believe it was, what, November 1st? Wasn't that the 500th? So I think they missed it by about a month. The game design is from Ed Beach. As mentioned, it is from GMT Games. And what I'm going to have to do here, I'm probably going to have to bust out the old reading specs. So I've got my hobby knife here. Let's flip this on over. There are some pretty interesting aspects about this game to point out, because the game is actually for 3 to 6 players. And in this edition now, I'm not sure if the previous edition had a 2-player variant. I don't think it did. But this is a game that is really going to be best played with, with 6 players, or as close to that full complement of players as you can get, because there is a lot of negotiation that goes on in this game, and the negotiations are in secret. So, and I know when I say something like that, people who are familiar with the game diplomacy might start, oh, wait a second, hold on. I've heard stories about diplomacy. Don't brawls break out over diplomacy? No. As long as you're gaming with the right people, you should not have any brawls breaking out when you have to double cross somebody in a game. It's just part of the game, folks. So let me grab a sip here. Anyway, so it's for 3 to 6 players. It does have variant. I believe there's a solitaire variant in here as well. It's for ages 14 and up. GMT gives it a 6 on their 1 to 9 complexity scale. And it is a solitaire suitability at 2. Which, I don't know, I'm kind of surprised. Gene, Tony, and the gang didn't just go with a 1. I don't know. I mean, because I completely had thought that this was really not going to be a game that you could really play solitaire. But I guess there is the variant in there. Anyway, a little bit from the back of the box. Here I Stand, Wars of the Reformation, 1517 to 1555, is the first game in over 25 years to cover the political and religious conflicts of early 16th century Europe. The 25 years part, I believe that's from the original edition, so it might not really come into play. But I know it had been a long time since any games before this came out tackled this subject or this time period in the wars that took place. Few realize that the greatest feats of Luther, Calvin, Loyola, Henry VIII, Charles V, Francis I, Suleiman, Magellan, Cortez, and Copernicus all fall within this narrow 40-year period of history. This game covers all the action of the period using a unique card-driven game system that models both the political and religious conflicts of the period on a single point-to-point map. There are 6 main powers in the game, each with a unique path to victory. The Ottomans, the Habsburgs, French, English, Protestants, and the papacy. Here I Stand is the first card-driven game to prominently feature secret deal-making. See what I mean? A true 6-sided diplomatic struggle, the game places a heavy emphasis on successful alliance building through negotiations that occur away from the table during the pre-turn diplomacy phase. Backstabbing is always possible, especially because the card deck is loaded with event and response cards that can be played by any power to disrupt the plans of the powers in the lead. All right, and there's just a little bit more, but let's get on in. Okay. And as I had mentioned early on when I picked this up to show it off, before we got into the news, this is a hefty box. And as I said, I can tell you, excuse me, right now, we are not going to see a bunch of air in this box. In fact, I would not be too shocked to see that once you would punch the counters and everything else, you might have a hard time squeezing everything back in. Okay, so yes, it says there's a 2-player variant. So there's some variant cards and rules. I don't know what I was thinking about solitaire. Crazy. All right. So as we can see, this is right up onto, it's level with the box. So we've got the rule book, and we're going to take a peek into the rule book. And normally when I'm taking unboxing a game like this, I always try to point out space is at a premium. So I will do my best to get you guys a good look at stuff, but don't have a whole lot of space. So we've got an introduction talking about the game map, showing off the various symbols or flags for each of the powers. Space, political control, religious influence. Religion is going to play a huge role in this game. And one thing I should point out too, as I was talking about, you know, this is going to be a meaty game that you could introduce people to the concept of war games. This is not necessarily a game where it's Protestant versus Catholic either. Because if you're familiar with the wars during the period, there were plenty of Catholics fighting Catholics and Protestants fighting Protestants. Although, of course, that's not what they said they were doing, but they were doing it anyway. All right, other map elements, powers and rulers. Rulers are going to play a very large role in this as well, I believe. We've got the power cards, military units, naval leaders, land units, and as you take a look there at the land units, this is not going to be a game where, from my understanding, this isn't going to be a game where it's very, very complicated as far as military actions. It's going to be, I believe, more abstracted. So to give you an idea, you got mercenaries, cavalry, naval units, the cards, card types, home cards, mandatory event cards. I love card-driven games, especially historical card-driven games. I just dig it. I get to learn a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know about. And many times it actually, when you're playing these card-driven games, you can kind of piece together why these things happen. It's talking about response cards, combat cards, event cards, the deck, adding cards, dealing cards. Oh, I wonder if it's got a bit of an aspect where as time passes on, you've got different cards that enter into the deck. Very possible. Discard pile and cards that are out of play. Sequence of play. And of course, Martin Luther kicks it all off. So in the first turn, he has his own phase. Starting a turn, diplomacy, alliances, non-binding agreements. And then there's an example of the negotiation phase, suing for peace, ransom of leaders, removing excommunication, declarations of war. We've got spring deployment, the action phase, actions, an action summary of what you can be doing with those actions, control and unrest, movement, it's an impulse example. If you're not overly familiar with GMT Games, and I can tell this is fairly meaty rule book here. They really do cover their bases really, really well a vast majority of the time. So reading through the rules, you don't normally encounter a whole lot that you're scratching your head about. Avoid battle, field battle. Here's an interception in battle example here. And I see we've got a scenario book. I wonder if that's also considered the playbook. Because another thing I really love about GMT Games is that they'll have these playbooks that go into a lot of historical detail. There's usually an extended example of play that'll cover a few turns to kind of give you an idea of how all these mechanics kind of work together, how they mesh together. Got naval combat, naval transport, piracy. Page was kind of sticking there. Unit construction, the Reformation. So you've got religious actions, biblical translations, religious modifiers, Reformation attempts. And there's a Reformation attempt example. Theological debates. Interestingly enough, I understand that these theological debates, you could actually have the loser of the debate burned at the stake. Got Winter, the New World, because there's exploration, Voyages of Conquest. Why is this sticking together here? What is with looking... Well, they're not really, I don't want to say they're necessarily sticking together. It's just, these pages just aren't, something up here. I don't know. But this game smells so fresh. It's just funny. Sometimes you unbox a game and it's like, wow, this came straight from the printer. Or not long after coming off the print, from the printer. Major powers, going into discussion about the Ottomans, Habsburg, England, France, the papacy, the Protestants, sack of Rome. Then there's minor powers. And victory, because that's what you're playing everything for. So there are victory points that will be tracked. And there's a victory record sheet on the back. So it looks like there are 9 turns. I'm taking a guess. It's 9 turns probably for the full campaign. Okay, so we got a scenario book. There we go. Talking about getting started, the scenarios, map and power card layout, force pool setup. There's the 1517 scenario. And it says it's the lengthiest version of the game. There's the 1532 scenario. Tournament scenario. Setting your own time limit. Games with 3 to 5 players. Look at that. Play by email tips. That's cool. Boy, that haven't heard play by email in a long time. Got designer notes. Oh, this is pretty funny. The designer note from Ed Beach says, our Friday night gaming group in college mostly played role-playing games. SPI's Dragon Quest, which I had helped playtest, was our mainstay. That's kind of interesting. Design emphasis, religious mechanics, other difficulties. Here we go. Here's our extended example of play with loads of illustrations. Yep, going through all the different phases. Then I'll talk about, what cards some players had played and what happened from that. And action phase round 1. It's going through, see, each of the players. So you got the Ottoman, Habsburgs, England, papacy, Protestant. The game is history. This is usually really really interesting reading in the GMT games when they really talk about the history of the game. Now they're even talking about the various individuals, famous individuals from the Reformation. Very cool. Nicely done. So really, this book, the scenarios, it's like first 7 pages, 8 pages is really kind of scenario info. And then the rest is just giving you a really nice example of play, help you understand the game concepts, and just a lot of historical information. Which, like I said, for myself, is very cool because this is not necessarily a period of history that I'm overly familiar with. So Machiavelli, Copernicus. Nice. And then here's our 2-player variant. So you can argue with yourself during the diplomacy phase. Cool. All right. And then 2-player designer notes. Excellent. Then it looks like each of the players are going to have, looks like this is a player aid. So I would take a guess because I'm saying, okay, so this is France, right? So there's Francis the First. And it shows here the 1832 scenario setup. So I would guess that if you were playing the 1532 scenario, you're going to look at this. Okay, this is where my units and leaders in that are going to go. And then you're going to flip it over, and then you're going to utilize this card for the rest of the game because it's showing that there's bonus victory points, an explanation of the actions you can take, a chateau table for tracking victory points, so on and so forth. And each of these cards are going to be a little bit different. As I can see right here. Okay, so here's Here's Henry VIII. So we've got, there's that setup for that 1532 scenario. But if we take a look at this card, and just as a comparison, oops, looking at the actions, kind of different. See, there's no chateau table there. And it's showing, it looks like what kind of military leader they were, how large a command they can utilize, their, I guess, administrative rating, as well as any card bonus. So it looks like Francis I gets an extra card. And then Henry VIII is getting what bonuses he's got. And then we see, geez, marital status. And just which one of his wives is he married to. Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, then we got the Habsburgs and Charles V. There's that scenario setup. The Protestant forces. Martin Luther. And then they're set up. We've got the Ottomans. Nice. Gotta admit, GMT Games always kind of goes that extra mile. Give you a lot of goodies. Very cool stuff. Now, this game has been out for a bit. Not this edition, though. This edition was just coming out. But the first edition came out a few years ago. I don't recall how far back. Maybe 3-4 years? I'm sure somebody out there knows way more about it than I do. So here we've got a religious struggle card. Looks like this would probably stay out on the table. Because it looks like there's some there's a tracker on that. Yep. Stays on the table because it's single-sided. Got a sequence of play. Do we have these for everybody? It says this is for the 2-player game. And on the back, it's just the standard sequence of play. Cool. Talking about adding in different debaters on each of the different turns. I wonder if there's only 2 of these in here. Maybe. Got action summaries on these 2 cards. Not so bad when you gotta share stuff. Plus, you know, the reality is you could always scan it and just print off some copies so everybody at the table's got something. Combat. 2010. There you go. That's when this originally came out. Oh, this came out right about the time the Gaming Gang launched. Here I stand. We've got some... looks like some... these counters up top were addressing some errors in a previous edition. Then we've got some upgrades for the 500th anniversary. Some additional counters. Then extra counters down here. Then we've got the counter sheets. And as we take a look, we can see that, as I mentioned before, they're really just, it looks like it's just infantry, artillery, units with, I don't want to necessarily say rifles, but with firearms, we'll say. Okay. Knights of St. John. That's kind of cool. I was going to say, what about cavalry? And they are dual-sided. We see the markers for the different factions. More markers for the different factions up there. More units here. And once again, looks like these are the leaders. Here's Charles V. Yep, there's Henry VIII. No, that's not. Sorry, it's John Frederick. I think, I'm not positive, I think you may actually use standees in this as well. Like here we got Charles V. I think this might utilize standees, kind of like Washington's War does. All right, we got more of the counters, and it looks like a lot of this, outside of just the artwork and the colors, all pretty similar. Your infantry, well, and these faction markers. All right, here now we're getting into some miscellaneous. So we've got fortresses. Ah, there we go. There's some of the reformers. Okay. Showing at war. Looks like pirates. Victory points. Got war winner. Victory points. And once again, dual-sided. And then we've got the map, which I will take out last. Then we've got 10 dice, blue and red. Yeah, sure enough. There's the standees. And handy dandy baggies for sorting out the counters. And then we have the action cards. So we've got a diplomacy deck. Let's see what that one is. Oh. Two separate decks here. Lady Jane Grey. This is turn 6. So I'm wondering, let's see if you notice up there, Lady Jane Grey in the upper right corner, it says turn 6. I wonder if you need to, I'm sure you got to sort these out a little bit. I was going to say, I wonder if you actually have to sort some of these cards out and put them off to the side by what turn they become available. So let me grab a sip here, and then I will get these decks open. We'll take a peek at the cards. Here is the diplomacy deck. I've got the first deck here, and then the second deck. All right, get rid of that hobby knife. So let's sit here, and all of a sudden, here we start screaming because I've stabbed myself in the hand with it or something. Okay, so let's take a look at this diplomacy deck. Andrea Doria. Turn 1, French Constable invades, Corsair raid, diplomatic marriage. Yep, I'm seeing turns on here, and I'm taking a guess that you kind of sort Knights of St. John. There we go. Plague. Ooh. Shipbuilding. Excuse me. Taking a guess, I'm just Spanish invasion, Venetian alliance. So these all say turn 1, and then here we have play after SL event, play after SL event, turn after SL event. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's a turn after, not play after. Duh. About reading, Jeff. Turn after. Secret Protestant Circle. Siege of Vienna. Oh, I wonder if it's possible that says turn 1. Maybe you're not separating these cards out. Maybe you cannot play this outside of, well, or it's available to you to play from that turn on. Maybe that's possibly it. because I can't imagine that you would, because this says turn after SL event. I don't know. As I had pointed out, I am not familiar with this game. Let's take a look at one of these decks here. Ottoman home card, Habsburg home card, English home card, French home card, Papal Bull. So that's a Papal home card. Well, it's got a little bit of artwork on there. So it's giving you an either or on this. So with most card-driven games from GMT and from some other companies too, what you'll see is with the card, you'll have a number and then you'll have something down here. So this is really no flavor text on it, which is fine. So for the Janus series, it's basically saying that you've got 5 points, and usually these are like action points that you can utilize, or you can choose to use it for the event or whatever's on the card. So the Janus series says gain 5 extra dice in a field battle or 4 extra dice in naval combat. Play after seeing both sides' rolls, or add 4 new regulars to any combination of controlled Ottoman home spaces and or foreign war cards, but not in Algiers or a pirate haven. So these are the home cards. So I'm taking a stab that the players for each of these factions will get, maybe each of these players get this card automatically in their hand. And it looks like now we're starting to get into, well, here's what kicks it all off. Right there, mandatory. So I'm taking a wild guess that maybe you're gonna gotta put that to the side because you know it's got to be played. Maybe not. It says mandatory, so I guess it's possible that if a player gets this card in their turn, they must play this card. That's a possibility. I know in, say, like Twilight Struggle, if you have a scoring card in your hand for that turn, that scoring card has to be played that turn. You cannot hold on to it to a later turn. So we got Barbary Pirates, Clement VII becoming Pope, or, yep, I was going to say, not when he dies. Yep, that's when he becomes Pope. Defender of the Faith, Master of Italy. So these are all mandatory cards. Paul III, Society of Jesus. This is really cool stuff. Calvin. Edward VI. Ah, interesting. So you would have this, and Henry VIII will die. Henry II, and okay. So I'm seeing. Yep. See. So it says turn 6 if born. So if Edward's not born, you can't play it. So I'm taking a guess that it's from that turn on. And I am going to do my best to get a review of this out, or at least a how to play, as soon as I can. I just think it'll probably be fairly difficult for me to get 6 people playing this game. Just think it would be kind of tough. So, all right. So then we got some combat cards. Field artillery. Mercenaries bribed. Mercenaries grow restless. Siege mining. Nice. Surprise attack. Foul weather. Here are the response cards. I don't want to go through and show off every single card, because I like to, excuse me, I like to leave some surprises. Professional rowers. All right, we got some professional rowers. Halley's Comet. Cool. Machiavelli the Prince. And you can see that these cards will have different values up in that corner, right? And a lot of times you can kind of get an idea of how valuable that event would be based on the number. And you're going to see here, I was going to just say, you'll see down here on many cards, it's going to say, okay, well, once this is played as an event, you're going to remove it from the deck. Because a lot of times you're going to actually end up reshuffling the deck as you play. So Galleons, saying turn 4, but you see it's got a value of 2, but this is a card that could be played, go into a discard pile, and then if the deck needs to be reshuffled, this comes back into, it possibly will come back into play because it's in the discard. Whereas cards that are removed from the game will go in a different pile so that you know not to accidentally shuffle those back in. But keeping in mind, for an example like right here, if a player plays this for that value up here, the event doesn't take place. So remember, it's an either or. Michelangelo. Ooh. All right. Papal Inquisition. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Bring in the comfy chair. Come on, you knew I was just waiting to bust that out. Okay, so we'll just, Book of Common Prayer. A Mighty Fortress. Anabaptists. Very cool. City-State Rebels. So, of course, this is a game where you have to read the card and understand the cards that you have in your hand and what they can do if you are going to have any possibility of winning this game. I mentioned that. Now, granted, okay, so my nephew is 16, so it's not as if I expect him to be able to be right on top of everything. But sometimes we'll be playing something, even when, granted, now this is going back a few years, so he was younger. He really wanted to learn how to play Magic the Gathering, and I was like, okay, so I showed him how to play, taught him how to play, and I would constantly whoop him. And he's like, I don't understand how I can never win this game. And I said, well, because you don't look at your cards and understand what these cards do and how you can use these cards in a combination to do really cool stuff. It's like, gotta read the cards, man. Understand the cards. And that goes along the lines of when he was younger, he got into hero clicks. Wouldn't bother figuring out, what were the powers of each of these superheroes, because it was Marvel hero clicks. Because my brother Greg is a huge Marvel fan, a big comic collector. It's all Marvel stuff. And I had to laugh because he would actually go to the comic book store. Now, granted, he was like 13. And he would play with all, different people, all ages in these hero clicks tournaments. And he would get smoked like a cheap cigar. And he'd come home. And he was okay. He was a good loser. So you got to give that to him. And he'd say, Uncle Jeff, I don't understand why I can't win. I was like, well, so what's the team that you use? He'd bust him out. I'd be like, okay, so what does he do? What does Captain America do? Well, he's got this. I said, yeah, but what are these symbols here? What are, because I hadn't played hero clicks. I was like, I don't know. I was like, well, that's why you're losing. Because you don't know what he does. So anyway, so this is obviously a game that you're going to spend time, let's just leave this out for a second here. You're going to have to spend a little time taking a peek at these cards once you get them and kind of thinking, okay, so how can I utilize this? Just like, I think one of these days I am actually going to try to spend some time just showing off how to play Twilight Struggle, because I love Twilight Struggle, and I know there are people who are kind of scared off by Twilight Struggle. And one person who I couldn't get to play Twilight Struggle, although he was interested in it, a good buddy of mine, Louie, out in Arizona, out in the Phoenix area. When I lived out there, I was like, and he had Twilight Struggle, and I kept, because his son, he would play with his son. I was like, different games now. And I said, so have you played Twilight Struggle yet? No. It's like, you know, if you're scared, just say you're scared. So thankfully, I found out that because I actually would play his teenage son in Twilight Struggle, but Louis himself just scared to play it. But I had heard recently that he has gotten into it, and I believe he really digs the game. Okay, so let's take a look at the map, or I should say game board. And as I had mentioned, space is at a premium, so I don't believe I can get close. I can kind of get it close to showing this off. Alright, so let's try it kind of this way. So, we see here we've got new riches, new world riches table, colonies, conquest. These are the different areas here: England, France, Spain. So it looks like there's a London box. There's a map key over here. So we got North Sea, Irish Sea, Bay of Biscay, the Atlantic, Gulf of Lyon. Then, oh, that's kind of cool. We have a new world map. Can't get the whole thing in. And then we've got... Nice. Cool. Italy. Then over here we've got the diplomatic status display. Henry's wife's pregnancy chart. That is pretty interesting that it's actually on the game board. I would have thought maybe they would have just put it on a chart, but no, it is on the game board. Down here, we got a victory track. It's just... yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I can't really get this into the shot. And the thing is, with these mounted boards, these mounted maps and stuff, you got to be careful when you unfold them out, because there is a paper backing to it in that, and if you're not careful, you can tear it. So, like, as I fold this part up here, right, this area here, if I don't handle this board right, I could tear this underneath. And I did that once on a game, and ever since then, I'm like, I got to be super, super careful. And of course, this camera is on a tripod, so I can't just grab the camera and kind of zoom in on it or anything like that, because it's actually above us. So, here, okay, I can at least show kind of the New World map that I thought was kind of cool, showing that different victory points and stuff. Nice. This looks mighty, mighty impressive. It really, really does. And, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the MSRP on this. But it's 80? I think it might be 80. Rats. And, yeah. Thought it was like $79.99. I might be wrong. I mean, so don't jump on me over that. So what we've got here is we have the standees, the baggies, the 10 dice. We've got the 2 decks of cards. So we've got the diplomacy deck, and of course there's more of the actual action card deck. So we've got the 2 decks. Put the box back over here. So we've got these. That's good enough. Let's separate these down. And I always say, just sleeve your cards. It makes life so much easier. Nothing worse than somehow one card getting damaged and you're like, oh, yeah, well, here comes the XYZ card again. And your opponent's got it, and you're like, oh, here comes XYZ because it got damaged. All right, so we've got that. We've got the really cool Here I Stand mounted board. We have the multiple counter sheets. That's 2, that's 3, that's 4. We've got the additional counters and the 500th anniversary counters, as well as some errata counters up here. 2 reference cards. 2 sequence of play cards. The Religious Struggle card. The faction cards. The scenario book. And the rule book. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we get when we take everything from Here I Stand outside the box. I'm telling you, this looks really, really impressive. I know the game originally came out 2010, and remember I was sitting there going, you know, I could have swore I may have did an unboxing or something like that. It's like, guess not, because the Gaming Gang launched in September of 2010, and I don't recall we were on board with GMT at that point, or GMT was on board with us at that point. I can't recall. So anyway, that is Here I Stand. It is available right now from my good friends over at GMT Games, and you can order it. Every time I'm going to show off a GMT game, regardless if it's a how to play or an unboxing or review, you want to keep in mind GMT Games do not usually have huge print runs. Even Twilight Struggle goes out of print for a while. So if you're interested in Here I Stand, now this has been out month-ish, month and a half-ish maybe. So it's very likely your friendly local game store may not have it in stock. I think it's still on stock from GMT Games itself, from their website. Not positive. So I always say, if you're interested in picking up a GMT title, by all means, you want to get there and you want to get it while you can. It's like Wild Blue Yonder. We have been playing tons of Wild Blue Yonder. It is my nephew's new favorite game, and I had a blast. And I mentioned yesterday that my nephew had a holiday party, and he had a bunch of his friends, high school friends, come over and that. And I actually refereed a 4-player game of Wild Blue Yonder. And there was a game that these guys had no clue about outside of Cameron, because he's been playing. He keeps asking every time I go by there. It's like, hey, you got that Blue Yonder game? I'm like, yes, I got Blue Yonder. It's a Wild Blue Yonder. So I'm taking a wild stab that is probably gone out of every friendly local gaming store out there. You may only be able to get it online. So don't wait. That's all I'm trying to say. Don't wait, because you don't want to have to spend the extra money to go on the secondary market when GMT titles sell out, because you're going to pay an arm and a leg for a cool game that if you had acted faster, you would have gotten for much less. Anyway, I did want to mention what's cooking for tomorrow. I'm going to move a few things out of the way real quickly. I have stuff stacked up all over the place. Dummy. All right, so tomorrow I will be doing an unboxing of something quite different than what we were taking a peek at today. And it is Shutterbug from Calliope Games. They were kind enough, if you saw yesterday's show, they sent me their 3 latest releases for me to share with the folks on the Daily Dope, as well as on the GamingGang.com. So that's pretty cool. And then, hey, we're not done with GMT just yet, because Friday I'm reviewing Welcome to Centerville. For a second I had to look, because I thought maybe I had it upside down, but I don't. It's right side up. So that's what I've got cooking. And so that's what's on the agenda. I got a few things cooking right now for January, as far as maybe some giveaways, some promotions, things like that. Interviews are coming soon. I'm ironing some of that stuff out. I still have to play around probably over New Year's weekend with Skype. Hey, I've had to juggle around with the technical aspects of just doing this. Now Skype comes into the equation. Yeah. Just something else that can go wrong, right? Anyway, so that is the show for today. When you are not checking out the Daily Dope, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. You know the drill. Go get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I am Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your War Game Wednesday.